Hello, Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to Self-Worth Saturday. So let me know how the sound is if you are watching this right now or if you're watching this after the fact, because I turned off the fish tank. It's like magic. I think you might actually not hear constant water in the background. So I'm curious how that's going to turn out. That said, it's still hot, can't control the traffic, but anyways, I squirrel already. Let's get into Self-Worth Saturday. So if you are new here, just a quick rundown. Self-Worth Saturday is a series on this channel where I like to talk about a topic of the week, something related to self-worth, self-care, or self-love. These are usually topics that have been voted on by the members of the Supportive Tarot Facebook group, but you are always welcome to suggest new topics down below, and those go into that poll. I do occasionally also throw polls up on the community tab of my YouTube channel now that I can do that, and I'm always open to new ideas for this series. We have quite a list going right now, but I'm always happy to add to it. But what I do is I talk about the topic of the week, and I usually share a few tips, some definitions, some descriptions of what this particular topic is all about, and I like to give a few journal prompts for those of you in the room who like to write to process things or for your personal growth. And I always like to give a weekly challenge as well, something that we can sort of work on actively to improve this particular area of our life if it's an area that we relate to, that we feel like we could benefit from improving. So before I dive into this week's topic, which is going to be learned helplessness, I want to talk briefly about last week's challenge. So last week, the challenge was to try to notice, because last week's topic was about coping with rejection. And so last week, we were challenging ourselves to notice when we were rejecting other people. And this can be little rejections, from just turning somebody down when they offer you a beverage, or when you're at the drive-thru and you're asked if you want anything else. Just notice the little rejections throughout your day-to-day life, and just notice how it feels to be the one doing the rejecting, because I think that's really valuable to get perspective on what it feels like to be on the other side. I think a lot of times when we feel rejected, or when something that we offer gets turned down, we feel like it's really personal, but when we're the ones doing the rejecting, it's easier to see that it's not personal. And sometimes it is. I mean, and I get that, but I'm curious to know, so if you are watching this right now, either in the comments down below, or if you're watching this while it premieres on YouTube for the very first time, then there'll be a live chat open along with this video. Let us know in the live chat or in the comments down below how you did with this last week if you were working on this challenge. For me, I completely blitzed it. I mean, I knew this was gonna happen eventually, right? Where I was gonna be like, here's a challenge, and we all do it together, and then I was gonna space it, and I totally spaced it this week. It's been kind of one of those weeks where I feel like I had a lot of things happening like on my mind and like in my life, and I just completely spaced paying attention to this. But I will say that the one that has really stuck with me is the example I gave about, would you like fries with that? I don't know why, I don't even think I got fast food this past week, but that particular example about how we say no to small things without even thinking and without feeling self-conscious at all, it just kind of like stuck with me. So I'm sure that I've done plenty of rejecting this past week, I just can't remember any of it because I forgot to pay attention. Hopefully you fared better than I did on this particular one. So let's get into learned helplessness. So before I keep saying before we dive in, but this is part of diving in. Full disclosure, I went down a serious rabbit hole of reading Psychology Today articles and looking up different definitions and clinical studies and all this kind of stuff around this topic of learned helplessness, because I'm really not sure that I'd encountered the term itself until it showed up as an idea for this series. But as I dove into the clinical information that I kept finding, and caveat, I am no therapist, psychologist, I have no training in this area whatsoever, so this was just me being curious about that more clinical side. The more I dove deep into that, the more I realized that this is not always a clinical thing. So as Peggy likes to tell us in our live chats, everything is on a spectrum. Everything is on this scale of like small to big. Shallow to deep. So I really want to frame the discussion of learned helplessness not only around the sort of clinical textbook definition of what that is, but we will talk about that. I want to frame the discussion more around how this shows up for all of us, because I think that it would be a rare person who hasn't experienced some of this at some point in their life, and I really want to take it to that basic level, at least in the beginning, and we'll see where we go from there. So I have a few notes, as always, otherwise there's no way I'm going to stay on track. So everything's on a scale, and I wanted to say, let's take the term, first of all, without getting into any history or whatever, let's just take the term at face value. When you hear the term learned helplessness, without doing any Googling or whatever, like, what does that make you think of? And if you're in the live chat, then definitely let me know, because I'm curious, and I'll be in the live chat interacting too, but I'm curious what that makes you think of. Because when I was talking about this with Peggy, what came to the forefront was anytime we learn to be passive or helpless when we probably don't need to be. And one of the things about that is that any number of circumstances, no matter what the intent was, like these could be normal everyday circumstances that could put us in this position to feel helpless about something, whether or not we really are. So I want to talk about it from that end first. So let's talk about so this is sort of the mild end of the spectrum when we're talking about taking this idea of learned helplessness at face value. How might that show up? And so here's some examples that I was kind of brainstorming with Peggy and that I wrote down for myself. What about being bad at school? So sometimes there are those of us who have been in any kind of schooling. A lot of us have been in some. Some of us have gone through periods of time where we're like, I'm really bad at either a subject or just at school in general. And it's like this, it's kind of like a cousin to the inner critic, which I will link, the video where we talked about the inner critic. It's a little bit of a cousin to the inner critic. There's a negativity when you say, like, I'm bad at something. And sometimes what we do is we say we're bad at something when we have no objective understanding of why we might be struggling or why we might not be doing well. So the school example came to my mind. I cannot get my words out. The school example came to my mind because I'm thinking about all the people I know have said I'm really bad at blah, fill in the blanks. And school is a good example because in school, you might find yourself in a situation where you're getting a really poor grade, but you're actually really good. It's just an approach that's not working. So an example that happened to me is that I was in high school English class and I was getting a C. And on all the standardized testing and in all of my other English classes, anything to do with writing or reading, I always scored really, really well because those topics interested me and I felt good at them. But for whatever reason, this particular semester, whatever, I was doing really poorly. And I remember getting called into the counselor's office about my grades and I was just like shaking. I was like, what is wrong with me that they are pulling me in? And what was actually happening was they wanted to put me into the honors English class. And at the time that felt ridiculous to me. I'm like, I feel like I should be getting an A before you invite me to honors. But what was actually happening, and in the US, honors is like an advanced level. But what was happening is they'd recognized that I was basically at a level where the content that was being provided to me at that class was not challenging me enough. And sure enough, when they moved me to the honors English class, the material felt more engaging and I started getting A's again. I could have very easily, with that C, been beating myself. I wasn't. So this might be a crappy example. But I could have very well been beating myself up thinking I'm bad at this, when in reality it was that I'm good at it and the material just wasn't speaking to me. Maybe a better example is if somebody's getting really, really poor grades, and it could just be that they're testing poorly. They might be doing great at learning, at applying the information, but then they freeze up on tests. Another example that Peggy and I were talking about is me and cooking. So you may have heard me talk about this on my channel. I am not a fan of cooking, but what I actually regularly say out loud is, I'm a bad cook. Well, objectively, I'm not a bad cook. But two things have happened. Number one, I don't really enjoy cooking all that much. And number two, I live with two people whose cooking I do really, really enjoy. And number three, I'm lazy. So there's a bit of learned helplessness in the sense that we all just assume that I'm not gonna do the cooking. And part of that is because I don't want to. Part of it is because I feel like they're better at it than me. And so there's a little bit of mindless negativity I throw at myself, like, oh, I can't do this. And Peggy will regularly remind me, like, you cook fine. You just don't like to cook, and you like what we cook. And it's a good reminder. But there's, at the very mildest end of this spectrum that we're talking about, there's still a bit of that telling myself I can't do something because I've learned to let other people do it for me. And that is one of the mild ways that this particular idea can come up. So I want some of these examples to be relatable. I want them to make sense because it's not always this really deep, dark stuff. So another example kids whose parents might absent-mindedly say, oh, you're too young to read right now. Like maybe a kid brings them a book or whatever. Oh, here's a good example. So when Peggy's boys were little, she got them a video game that had, I think it was like a role-playing game, so it had a lot of text to read. And this is a story that stands out to me because I just think it's really interesting to think outside the box. But instead of saying, well, you can't have this game because you can't read, she got the, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like parents do that kind of stuff all the time. It's not an intentionally like bad thing. Nobody's being abusive. It's just this, the parent is like, oh, you're not ready for that. But the child might hear, I'm too stupid, or I can't read. Do you know what I mean? Like we can take on these messages even though everything is otherwise like fine. I hope I'm making some sense. And I also just kicked the tripod. So what Peggy did instead was she actually used the game to help teach them to read. But a lot of us have had examples where a teacher has, in good faith, said something to us that just made us doubt ourselves, or a parent said something, or a peer that we looked up to said something, and nobody's meaning to do us any harm, but something has been said that we've internalized as, oh, I'm bad at this thing, or I can't do this thing. I remember when I learned about right brain versus left brain, I very, very much identified at the time as being very, very right-brained, which is like the more creative side, and really not left-brained, which is that logical, more mathematically, whatever inclined side of the brain. Because this was all the rage when this science was popular to talk about. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I'm really creative, but I'm just really bad at math. And I internalized that message. But then later, when things started to shift for me, I didn't recognize it. I just assumed I'm still really bad at math. Turns out, oh, here's another good example, since I'm on a roll. Math versus geometry. So a lot of you may have heard, oh, I just realized my dingers are on. A lot of you may have heard that kids who are good at like math and algebra and like maybe not trigonometry, I don't know what that is. I shouldn't say I know what that is because I never got that far. But algebra, for example, I sucked at algebra, right? But when I got into geometry, which is still math, I did really great. I loved geometry. It just worked better for my brain. So me saying all the time I'm bad at math isn't really true. But I had that learned idea that I was bad at math because I knew that I was more creatively inclined. I see and hear a lot of people say things like, I can't sing, I can't do public speaking, I can't dance, I can't paint, I can't draw. I've been guilty of doing the same thing because we hear messaging or we get messaging that implies that we can't do a thing, and we take that on and assume we can't do anything to change it. That is a type of learned helplessness. It's over at the shallow end of the pool, yes, but it is a type, and I think it's important to note that a lot of us have experienced this, and it shows up for some of us in small ways and for some of us in big ways. Sometimes you have an overly helpful partner who's constantly doing a particular thing for you to the point where you're like, I don't even know how to do this thing. And it's sometimes not a horrible thing. Like, to be honest, I'm not great at laundry. I don't know how to sort the clothes. I never learned properly about like stains and the right detergents and soaps, and Peggy is a whiz at it. So I'm like, I can't do that. Truth is, I could probably change that if I wanted to. I don't really want to, so I don't. But there's a little bit of that learned helplessness where it's like, oh, I can't do that. Offhand, right? I sort of sell myself short. Reality is, I could definitely learn how to do that. So these, again, mild examples. So let's talk about the other side of the spectrum. So this is like everyday stuff that a lot of us have experienced. And then over at this more extreme end, learned helplessness, as it was studied and as the clinical trials showed and all this kind of stuff, was really about people who are exposed to negative stimuli. So these were tests that were done, and you can look all of that up if you would like. I'm going to avoid putting links because it's quite a rabbit hole, but if you want to Google the term, you'll find lots of stuff. But there were some studies done, and they concluded that people, like psychologically, that if you're exposed to negative stimulus and you can't change it, that then later, when you are given the ability to change it, you can actually just kind of give up. Think that, well, I couldn't change it before, so why could I change it now? And so if you've been through really negative experiences that were completely outside of your control, learned helplessness can show up in a way where you feel like you're powerless to change your circumstances when they're negative, when they're hard. And so in like a not so deep side and a not so shallow side, let's go in the middle. Middle could be like life-changing, difficult experiences like losing your job. If that happens to you a couple times in a row, you might feel like a failure. You might feel like you can't succeed at anything. But what if all of the times you lost your job, they were just cost-cutting measures? They were corporate layoffs. You didn't have any control. Now you have control, and you could choose to work for a smaller company that's less likely to do that, something that's not publicly traded, or you could go start your own business, or you could do something different. But some of us take on that messaging of there's something wrong with me and I can't change it anyways, so why bother? And we stay in these unpleasant situations and unpleasant circumstances because we're convinced we don't have the power to change. When we move back into this deep like level of the pool, or the deep side, the dark side of the spectrum, when we've been through trauma and things like that, we can learn that we have no control, and we find it difficult sometimes to learn that actually we do have control. We can take some control back in our lives, and we do have the power to change our circumstances. But if you've learned that powerless feeling, sometimes you think that's the only truth and that stays with you forever. So that's what happens kind of at the dark end of the spectrum. But most of us have experienced some form of learned helplessness, and most of us are experiencing it at that mild level, right? It could be things we say to ourselves: I can't draw, I can't speak, I can't paint, I can't sing. If you've ever had somebody, I've actually done this to people without even thinking about it, so it's not people doing this to be mean, but if you've ever been in the car with somebody and like you're belting out the latest tune and somebody turns the music up, it can actually make you feel like, oh, they're trying to drown out my voice because they think I can't sing. And then you might never sing in the car again, because we're wired this way, right? We sort of learn that, oh, this means we're bad at it, so we can't do it. And I know that this is a bit of a mixed bag and it's a complex topic, and we'll have a lot more time to unpack it in the live chat that we'll have after this video, but I just wanted to throw out a few more examples. So some things that I've done to myself. I couldn't possibly be a yoga teacher. Well, I'm a yoga teacher, right? But I told myself that for a long time because I didn't think I had the right body. I didn't think that I was really allowed. And so I felt powerless to change that until I was like, wait, maybe I could. But I had to flip that way I was thinking on its head before I could make any progress. I often say I have a terrible memory. In fact, if you've talked to me for like more than 5 minutes, one-on-one, I've probably said it to you. And that is a learned helplessness. I, through a whole variety of circumstances, have learned to have, I think, a poor memory. And so I act like it's something I'm powerless to change. But the reality is, if I step back, I could do memory building exercises, I could do things to work on this, or I could accept that, okay, this isn't a big deal, and I could make accommodations, which is kind of what I do now, right? Like I make sure to write things down, I try to be more mindful of things I need to remember, that's why I plan, but that's why I make lists, but not everything has to necessarily be changed. I think what I want to do with this topic is point out that sometimes we have these experiences and they change the way that we approach our lives, and sorry for the traffic. And sometimes when it changes how we approach our lives, it's in a way that keeps us from living our fullest life. And sometimes it's no big deal. It's no big deal that I don't cook. I probably don't need to be saying all the time I can't cook. That's probably not helping my self-worth. But I can accept that I would rather not cook, and I can totally own it, and it's fine. I can accept that I really don't want to change the fact that I don't know how to do laundry that well, because let's face it, it's convenient to not know. But so there's some learned helplessness, right? But it doesn't have to be earth-shattering. Other examples, I could never write a book. I keep using these creative examples because I think I've seen so many people get hung up on these. I could never paint, I could never draw. Really what we're afraid of is we're afraid of failing, right? And that's probably gonna be its entirely own topic. But learned helplessness at its core shows up whenever you are being excessively passive or kind of resigned, and not taking risks because you presume you're gonna fail before you even try or before it even happens. So one of the things when we get back, I know I'm kind of all over the place, so just hang out with me, we can do this. I just have a lot to cover. One of the ways that this shows up in that deeper we're doing it over here. Deeper level of the spectrum is, if you've ever heard of the fight or flight response, we have fight. Nowadays, it's more commonly recognized that we have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And fawn is basically learned helplessness. It's passivity in the face of feeling a lack of control. It's giving over your power because you feel like you can't change anything anyway. It's when you're faced with some kind of a situation that's uncomfortable and you assume that you can't do anything to change it, so the best thing to do is to basically submit to that situation. And one of the ways this shows up with me now is whenever I'm faced with somebody who I perceive has some sort of power or authority over me. And this can be something as simple as a doctor, a lawyer, any other professional, really. I can consciously sort of throw away my power because I just feel like, well, they're in charge, so whatever they say goes. And I throw away everything that I know, everything that I'm confident about. I just set it aside, like without even thinking. It's an automatic response. So there's lots of different ways that this kind of stuff can show up in your life. I do want to make a note though, especially if you decide to do a lot of Googling about this, because it's such a rabbit hole, as I've mentioned. Learned helplessness really describes a powerless feeling and a why bother kind of feeling, but sometimes that can get really muddied up with real depression, clinical depression. And if you're feeling a lot of those kinds of feelings, I definitely recommend that you talk to somebody who is licensed and is a professional and can help you sort this stuff out. Because all I can really share is my own personal experiences and where I feel like this feeling has shown up for me in my life and how I've navigated it. But for some people, there's chemical stuff going on in your brain. Get to some help and help get it sorted out, because if you're feeling why bother with most of your life, I really think that some support is probably needed and super helpful, and there is no shame in that. So I wanted to point out a quick quote. According to an article, I have babbled already for like 22 minutes. Oh my God, this is gonna be a long one. I'm gonna try to shorten it a little. But according to an article in Psychology Today, learned helplessness is the opposite of self-efficacy. It is the belief that what we do ultimately does not matter, that we will be stuck in the same life patterns no matter what we think, say, or do. Whereas self-efficacy is the belief that one's actions will tend to reach a desired result. In other words, the antidote to learned helplessness is practicing feeling and believing that you're capable, that you have personal power, that you have agency. And so when we're getting into how to change these patterns in your life, the things that I think have been helpful for me and that I think sound like the most useful based on when I started, I cannot get my words out, you guys, seriously, so struggling. But in my life, when I felt that sense of powerlessness, when I felt defeated, or when I felt that why bother feeling, these are the things that I found personally helpful. There, that's what I was trying to say. I got it out. It's all good. So first, bring mindfulness to the equation. So if you notice, if you actually pay attention to those times when you're coming at a situation with why bother or I can't kind of energy, then that's going to really change how you look at those situations. For some of us, just bringing that mindfulness piece in is all you need. And as soon as you catch yourself doing it, you can go, oh, actually, I can, or I could, and you can remind yourself about your personal power. But the first step really is just to notice when you're giving that power away, or when you're in that pessimistic or defeated kind of place, and pay attention. Really, that's what most of it's about. And the second thing that I find really helpful is to replace learned helplessness with your personal power. This is gonna sound so cheesy, so just buckle up. Replace your I can'ts with I cans. Now I know about like half of you at least are groaning right now because it sounds so cheesy, but it is so, so true. And just like any other kind of retraining the way that you think or the way that you approach situations, it's very much a fake it till you make it kind of situation. If you're like, I can't draw, and you catch yourself doing it because of step one, the mindfulness, and you literally make yourself say or write down, I can draw, it sounds dumb, you guys, but it helps. It helps because at the very least, you can go, okay, now that I've said it, should I try it? Which brings me to some of the next points. Number 3, this one has more to do with that sort of deeper end of the spectrum, but if you, like me, have struggled with giving away your power or feeling particularly powerless in specific situations because of your background or because of your experiences, then think about Peggy's bring it to go cup analogy. And if you don't know what that's from, I'll see if I can find the live chat and link it. But I'll quickly recap. I don't care how much time I'm taking. Okay, I'll quickly recap. So the Bring It To Go cup came up when we were talking about things like social anxiety in one of our live chats. And Peggy was talking to somebody in the live chat about, hey, when you're going into a situation where you don't know if you're going to be comfortable, you don't know if you're going to want to bolt, but you want to do the social thing. You want to get out of your house. You want to go hang out with somebody, but you're worried you're going to get shy. She's like, go plan to sit down, meet with your friend, hang out with your friend, but get your coffee in a to-go cup. That way, if you need to leave at any point, you can. Your coffee's already ready to go, and there's not the same pressure to stay and stick it out. And so in that way, what I'm talking about is if you know you're going to be going into a situation where you might feel tempted to give away your power, or where you know you might be feeling powerless, do something to help you hold on to some of that personal power in that situation. So for example, one of the areas that I said I struggle with is whenever I'm faced with somebody who's an authority figure. So recently when Peggy and I were planning to go to a vet checkup for the dogs, she and I are very clear and very confident about how we're handling our dog's care. Like, we're really good. I'm really feeling good about what we're doing, the steps we're taking, all of that good stuff. But I have a tendency, when even remotely questioned, to be like, oh my God, I'm doing horrible and I must be bad, and like I need to do whatever this person says who's on the other side of the table. And so what I said to Peggy was, hey, I'm gonna let you lead this conversation because I trust her and I know she'll hold on to that agency and that personal power when having these conversations. And it may sound really silly, but going in with that contingency plan made it easier for me to hold on to my own agency when we were in that appointment, right? And so in other situations, it might be something as simple as, if you're going to have a conversation with somebody who you know tends to make you feel more passive and acquiescent, writing down the things that matter to you that you want to bring up in that meeting. It could be going into a work meeting where you tend to cave to the person who has more experience and you tend to not share your ideas. Write your ideas down, have them on paper, so that when you're in that meeting and you're tempted to go, my ideas don't matter, you at least have them in writing. You're more likely to hold on to that agency, that power in that situation. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know if you're watching this right now in the Premiere live chat, or let me know in the comments and I'm happy to expand on what I meant. But the idea is to kind of just plan ahead for those moments you know you might be vulnerable or be feeling particularly powerless, and kit up, right? Gear up. Any of you who are gamers, like, get your gear on, right? Like, plan ahead. So the next thing is to try things, experiment, make decisions, because that's the other thing. When we're feeling particularly passive, we sort of leave all the decisions to somebody else because it's less, it's a way of giving away our power in that situation. It's making it somebody else's responsibility. It's, again, a type of learned helplessness. So make decisions, learn, more traffic, I'm sorry. Learn by experience. What did I put here? Oh yes, the outcomes vary based on what actions you take. Because one of the things that happens with learned helplessness is we feel like whatever we do doesn't matter, that it has no impact, that we don't make a difference, that whatever we do isn't going to actually cause change. But if you're experimenting with your actions, you'll start to actually see measurable things that change when you change what you do and how you approach your life. So I think experimenting, putting yourself out there, playing is really, really, really important. And the last point, which is kind of a piggyback on the previous one, is have fun failing. Now, this is gonna seem really, really foreign. And again, we're gonna talk about like a whole video all on dealing with failures, I think. I think it's on the list somewhere. But have fun failing on purpose. So what happens a lot of times is we get invested in an outcome and we don't want to do the thing because we're worried we're going to fail. But if you plan to fail, this is actually so counterintuitive, but it can be kind of fun. If you go into something planning to fail, then you'll learn that not always do you fail, but just by trying the thing that you normally wouldn't have tried because you were afraid of failing, you'll experience some success. In fact, just the fact that you did it without being attached to the outcome is already a win. So really, when you're trying to fail, by trying something new, you're definitely winning. Did anybody follow that? Because in my head that made so much sense, but out loud, it's like this like tangled pretzel. But here's an example. Peggy and I experimented with casinos. And this is gonna be like one of those random examples, but neither one of us really like gambling. But I discovered that through a friend that the really cheap little penny casinos can be really fun to play when they have like these bonus games that pop up and stuff. But instead of looking at gambling as a way to win money, like, we played to lose. In other words, we set a budget and we're like, what is the entertainment value of plugging $20 into a machine? Like, can we make that last? Can we get enough entertainment value out of it for it to be worth completely losing that $20? And so we literally played to lose. We would sometimes stop and have a few bucks to put back in our pocket, but we usually set a very low limit and went for the fun of playing, not for the attachment to an outcome. And it made it really, really, really fun, because instead of thinking how much money can I win, I was like, can I lose this money slowly and have fun doing it? And so that's kind of what I mean. It's like, have fun doing the thing. And if you plan to fail, then you've taken the pressure off of yourself, you've done the thing, and you've just proved that you could do the thing, because you did it. Because, do you see? I hope I'm making sense, for the love of Pete, because oh my goodness. So, okay, I've got to dive into journal prompts because I'm already over time. We're probably going to start the live chat at 10:15 instead of at 10 a.m. Pacific time if you're watching after, but here we go. Journal prompts. Journal prompt number 1. Think of some areas in your life where you feel like you might be overly passive or pessimistic. Number 2, identify if these are things you want to actually change. For example, with me with the cooking and the laundry, not so much. But with the giving away my power to authority figures, yeah. So think about which things on that list you might want to change. And of the things that you might want to change, how could you mindfully approach the present moment in a more personally empowering way when it comes to those things? In other words, are there things that you could do differently that you haven't tried before? Is there different approaches you could take? Could you be playing with this thing that you are doing this with, that you're being overly passive with? Give yourself some time to explore it. Here is this week's challenge. I'm going to get out our oracle deck so that I can give us a little oracle card reading. I'm working with the Oracle of the Unicorns. I don't have the box handy, but this is a Blue Angel deck, I believe. So here is this week's challenge while I shuffle. So this week, notice where and when you're being passive. Embrace your personal power by taking some risks, making some decisions, and experimenting with your actions in ways that feel empowering to you. Have a little fun failing. So however you choose to explore that this week, just try to get out of the I can't space. I'm trying to throw these cards all over my room. Try to get out of that I can't space and get into an I could space, and just see what shifts, if anything, and see if your outlook shifts. Sometimes for me, all it takes is that first step, that mindfulness step, and I'm feeling much, much better about things, and I'm feeling more optimistic about things. But see if you can notice for yourself what is helpful. All right, let's see what we got. Sanctuary. Take time out from the world, spend more time alone, meditate, or go on a retreat. Focus, there we go. It's beautiful. I love these cards. They're so gorgeous. So this week, when you're processing, when you're moving through the week, when you're noticing all of your I can'ts and you kind of hit those brick walls, take some time to be mindful. Spend some time with your thoughts, maybe do some journaling, and see if you can shift your mindset just a little bit. And remember, as always, to say to yourself as often as possible, I am worthy and I am unafraid. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you all again very, very soon.